I'm making a video game with underwater mechanics. In this devlog, patrolling pufferfish, player movement updates, new enemy, updated tools, a new level and world. With the jellyfish working correctly, I decided to refactor the behavior so it could also apply to the pufferfish. I started by creating some common interfaces. Since I want the pufferfish to stop when it gets hit, I implemented that behavior first. Then, I updated the logic so the pufferfish can face the correct way as it patrols. With the updates to the base pufferfish, I confirmed that the behavior for the non-patrol ones hadn't broken since I messed with the scale. I started by building some slopes and flat areas that covered all possible ground movement. Since my debug info panel showed a higher velocity than the logged out clamped version, I used the velocity from the info panel as my data points and made a chart of the speeds. Once again, I made use of the checkpoint system to gather different data points and compare how the speed changes felt. First, I tracked data points for the original movement speeds as a target to try to meet. Then, I played around with some force values to find a force that would let me walk up an incline. The first value was not strong enough. I swapped to 100 to see if that was enough to get me through the incline. Since that worked, I tried finding a sweet spot between 100 and 30. A force of 80, even boosting, was not enough to overcome the 45-degree incline. A force of 90 also had problems with a 45-degree incline. I figured a 45-degree incline requiring swimming was not a big deal in order to preserve the force method. So, I tried finding a smaller force that would let me get past the 25-degree incline. After gathering the data, I compared all the charts to make a decision on what value felt right. I settled for having a base force of 50 but doubling it if you're boosting, since that lets us walk up inclines. Swimming past an incline is still faster, so that leaves it up to player choice. Here's what that would look like if you weren't swimming and try to walk while boosting. I then run through the first level with this new movement. Using the input-only movement system, the fastest time was 17.6 seconds. With the force-based system, a speedrun took 15.9 seconds, so on average a player would be about 1.5 seconds faster per level. With the creation of the prop and blockout palettes, I added a new tab to the blockout palette that displayed enemies. This still contains some of the first versions of enemies, so I used the same categorization system from the prop palette to filter them out. With one enemy working, I categorized the rest with a new component. Then, I updated the editor window to instead place a subsection of enemies in a tab group. Since the two patrolling enemies don't cover the wall portions, I decided to introduce a crab that behaves like a moving stalagmite. I started by creating a script that would move an object between positions and wait at that position for some time. Unlike the two-point patrol enemies, the crab moves and waits along multiple positions. While implementing this, I thought about potentially refactoring the patrol behavior to also support this. With that rough idea out of the way, I decided to work on the art portion of it. I spent a long time trying to get something that looked alright. Eventually, I asked my wife for some help, and what she made was vastly superior, so that's obviously what I'm going with. Once the sprite was done, I imported it into Unity and fixed the physics shape in Collider. I also added the trigger area damager component. Since the crab can follow a path in an oscillating pattern, I decided to make a data structure that could return the next point for me instead of keeping that state in the crab script. This being a separate component allowed me to create the implementation using test-driven development. With that in place, I've removed all the logic from the crab script since the new oscillating list handles it all. I spent a while working on the gizmos so I could more easily spot the path of the crab's bounds. Trying to also include the rotation was tricky since I had to use perpendicular lines and then draw points between those lines. While working on the first level, I also added some temporary logic to assign rotations when the path isn't fully linear. I spent some time trying to calculate this based on positions, but I couldn't get the angle quite right. While sketching out the first level, I realized I would need diagonal tiles. Creating these was trickier since I needed the lines to stay straight to look like wood planks. I tried a bunch of variations, but they didn't tile correctly, so eventually I went with the simplest pattern. The 45-degree tile set had to be longer due to the details on the top part of the lowest tile. Afterwards, I imported the tiles and generated the physics outline. Once again, I used a reference for the physics shapes of each tile type. The first level is based on an outline of a ship, since this world is based on shipwrecks. This was the first time I used the blockout palette to help with this, and I was pretty happy with how that worked. I do need to add labels on the palette to more easily tell how big each block is. With the blockout in place, I worked on laying out the crabs. I wanted the first two crabs to be visible at the start so the player could observe how they move. Then, I spread crabs out to create some phrases. I did make this interesting section where you may have to squeeze between two crabs, so I spent some time ensuring you could do that without always being hit. Once the crabs were laid out, I ran through the level once and took notes of where things needed to be adjusted. As always, I made sure I could complete the level without getting hit. Then, the usual art path followed afterwards, starting with the collider tiles. Since it had been a while since I made a level, I forgot to change the rigid body to static and was surprised when it all came falling apart. Then, I added the filler tiles and water setup. For the last details, I created the leaderboard for this level and added an anchor to the world map. Here's a high-level overview of this level. That's it for this devlog. My focus for the next part will be add the next two levels to the third world. Update the score screen to display a breakdown of the score. If you want to support me, please visit the Don't Drown store page linked in the description and add the game to your wishlist. Until next time.